Hi, my name is Bhagwan Chaudhary. I am a professor of finance at ISB, the Indian School of Business. Today, I'm speaking with two of my colleagues, Shiv Dixit and Shekhar Tomar. Both of them teach economics at ISB. Today, we want to discuss where the funds will come from for the extra spending the government needs to do for COVID recovery. So one obvious answer whenever this comes about is why not tax the rich? Raise taxes. Shiv, what do you think about that idea?
Well, on paper, it seems like a great idea to just redistribute money from the rich to the poor, but I think it's going to be hard to implement. Our marginal tax rates are already pretty high, and there's a lot of evidence that suggests that going up beyond that is going to be detrimental for revenues for two reasons. One is that people tend to evade taxes beyond a point. And the second reason is the usual reason to not keep taxes too high is because it disincentivizes work. So it may very well be that you would like to increase taxes to amp up revenues, but that's just not going to be feasible because individuals have a behavioral reaction to that. That's on the income side. That's about 20% of our tax revenue. So even if we were to go down that route, I don't think there's enough leeway there to mop up the fiscal need that we have at this point. On capital income taxes, I think, and this has been raised by the IRS's report for those who have read it, they have suggested amping up taxes on companies like Google who are doing particularly well right now. There's a lot of evidence on this front as well that raising capital taxes actually ends up hurting laborers more than capital owners. So it may very well be again that we want to redistribute from the companies that have done well to those who don't, who are less fortunate. But again, that's just not going to be feasible. I think if there's any feasible route towards mopping up the fiscal need, it's through service taxes. And there's been a lot of discussion over the last 2 years on this front. And I do believe that the current GST system, the bracketed tax system, is far from optimal. I think we should go towards a uniform commodity tax regime, the level of which, the effective average tax rate of which could be higher than the average effective tax rates right now. So that is also going to be less conducive to evasion. There's a lot of literature that says that people evade less while buying commodities than when reporting their income. So that could be a feasible route. But I don't believe that this is the best way to mop up the fiscal deficit.
Okay. So let me just summarize. You're saying you can increase tax rates, but whether they will lead to more tax collection is doubtful. Second thing you're saying is that it causes other inefficiencies, which we don't really want. And you're saying there's a possibility with a service GST type of taxes, by simplifying, you can increase the average rate. But at this time, may not be a great idea in any case because we are not doing a lot of production.
The expenditure by the Indian government is usually on the consumption side, so it doesn't boost the GDP. So actually the government taxes 100 taxes and collects money 100 rupees, and it only increases the GDP by less than that. So when you want to increase the overall spending in the economy, or you want the overall economy to do bad, taxing people is not the right way because it's going to reduce the overall GDP in the end.
The second obvious thing that comes to people's mind is, hey, RBI has printers. They can just print money. Why not do that? This is a good time, isn't it?
So it was a very hard-fought battle over the last 1 decade that RBI stopped monetizing the money directly, stopped monetizing the deficit of the government directly.
What does that mean?
So now if we have
a deficit, so please spell it out for us, because some of us don't understand this jargon you economists come up with. Monetize the debt. What is that?
So it's no jargon. So it's more like 20 years ago, RBI would directly print the money and hand over the cash to the government. Now it's more controlled by the market forces. So RBI doesn't directly buy government debt. So it's still the RBI helps in issuing the debt, but it's the private players who go and mop up that government debt.
But I
So in
still
that
don't
sense,
understand why it's not a good idea. A common person would say, hey, you got a
so
printing press. This is the time to print money and hand it out.
so some of the people have talked about it. So Arvind Subramaniam mentioned about it briefly as one of the ways. But, and I mean, the US Fed is currently doing exactly that. But so if you really want to go down that slippery slope, maybe you should have some exit clause or say, okay, not more than this. So I'm not completely against it.
Okay.
But, it's a very slippery slope.
You said
And we
slippery
really
slope.
should.
So that seems to suggest that it works, but it works to a limited extent. And if you let it go, inflation will go out of hand and you will lose control. Okay. So you recently wrote a paper about how much fiscal spending should India do. And what did you find?
So the number we find is above 2% up to 5%. So it's between 2 to 5%. And one of the most important factors which determine this is the credit rating of the economy. So it's based on a global benchmark. So we look at how different countries are spending around the world. And we
Okay.
find that
So when I
countries
look
also
around,
face.
Shekhar, when I look around, I found that some countries like Singapore are spending over 10% of their GDP.
I mean, they are small city states. I think we shouldn't even talk about them.
So those numbers are out of the question. And we have spent less than 1%. So you're saying 10% is too high, 1% is too low. Maybe we can do 2, 3, 4%. Give me a sense of what is 4% of GDP? What number are we talking about?
So 4% of GDP would be something around $120 billion.
Okay,
That's what we are talking about.
let's say about $100 billion. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's do a little bit of accounting. We need to raise $100 billion. Where is it going to come from? Shiv says, let's not increase taxes. It may not raise any money. You're saying printing money maybe raise a little bit amount, but you definitely don't want to go to raise all 100 billion. So where else is the money going to come from?
So one potential way is you switch some expenditure from the current budget. So there is some part of the budget which goes to non-essential services, which can be moved towards fighting COVID. The
So that
second
makes sense. If I was a household and there was a trouble and I needed money, that's what I would do. I'll say, let's cut spending on things that are not so critical. Right now, the critical thing is food. So maybe let's not buy televisions. So you move money around. So you're saying government can reallocate some of the spending from some sources to. So what can they cut and how much?
So the non-essential part, so it again comes back to the accounting part. A big chunk of the budget goes to salaries and subsidies. And then there are some part of capital expenditures which the government can postpone, like building the highways. Although you would still want to do it because that's how you do the fiscal spending. That's how you're going to give the jobs. So some part of it you can still.
How much leeway is there? So take subsidies. How much
So subsidies is the tricky matter. So right now, the subsidies are somewhere around 2.5% of the GDP. So it includes food, fertilizers, and fuel.
Okay.
And in this situation, I mean, you of course want to provide food to the people, but the tricky part is it goes to the food subsidy, but a big chunk of it goes to FCI, which is the Food Corporation of India. So there has been a lot of distortion on where this subsidy actually ends up with. So a part of food subsidy goes towards maintaining this entire infrastructure of maintaining procurement and things like those. Similarly, on the fertilizer,
it won't be needed anymore. Is that right? I think we have kept this for a while. It's not clear that we really need it anymore.
So you can look at the government numbers, and they were already cutting it down. From the last year, they brought it down. So the rationalization has been going on there, and even the economic survey last year, they mentioned about it that it distorts both the input and the output market. So probably that's not the best way to give subsidy.
So
Plus,
how much can we squeeze out?
So we calculated you can probably squeeze out, if you cut down, if you squeeze 1/3 from these three subsidies, you can get somewhere around 0.7 to 0.8% of the GDP.
So that's about 1/4 of what we need. So maybe we can raise
Yeah.
40 billion or so by just
Yeah.
reallocating money.
Yeah.
Okay, that's one source. Where else? I still need another 70 or 80 billion. Shiv, where else?
So public debt is always an option in order to mop up current fiscal needs. So Shekhar is talking about how you can shuffle resources within a particular time. You could also shuffle resources across time. You can transfer future income to mop up some of your dips in income today. And this is exactly what debt is all about. Now, the issue here is that raising debt would raise also the possibility of a sovereign debt crisis. So loosely speaking, the sustainability of debt rests on two things. The first is the rate at which this debt is converted into output, which is the real GDP growth. And the other thing is the real interest rate, which is the rate at which this debt is serviced. So if the former is larger than the latter, then debt tends to be sustainable. And this has been the case in India over the last 2 to 3 decades. And we've racked up quite a lot of...
So
right, and we've racked up...
I understand. You're saying debt is a way of bringing future resources into current. Again, it's coming from people who have means, right? Those will be able to buy these bonds. So they will be able to transfer some of this money from future into current this thing, and by issuing debt. And you're saying the levels of debt so far are reasonable, but if you go too far there, then there's a chance of a debt crisis. So it's a limited.
Right, and there's a slippery slope here as well. There's essentially there's a tipping point, and if you go too far beyond that tipping point, and for instance, the markets tend to get a sense that you're not going to be able to finance the debt that you're raising because your GDP is not high enough to service the debt, which is likely to be the case, as many, for instance, the IMF have predicted about India's medium-term path. Then the market is going to demand a higher reward to give us that debt. Essentially, interest rates are going to rise even further, which makes it even harder for us to finance our debt, and this gets into a vicious circle. And it would be unwise to test those waters, I feel, at this point in time.
Add just one point to Shiv here, if you may allow me. So when we were calculating the fiscal deficit that raising the debt would lead in case of India, so we were calculating if you raise the entire money through debt, which is the entire 5% you fund through debt, then you are hitting a fiscal deficit of somewhere around 8.5 to 9% if the GDP falls by 20%. So I think we shouldn't go around 5%, but since we are putting numbers, I think we can still raise 1 to 1.5% of the GDP of debt. So that number is still
there. Can be raised, but not all of it. Okay,
yeah.
But I like the idea of bringing money from the future to the current. Maybe the right instrument isn't debt. Can we use equity? Can we get investors to step in and say, all right, we'll give you money in exchange for not debt payments, but dividend payments or something like that? Would that work, Shekhar?
It's exactly the same. I mean, you want the households to buy debt. Instead of that, you can ask the households to buy equity. So the government has a lot of PSUs. So of course, there is a chance that some of the good PSUs which are out there, this is the time to actually leverage the assets that we have and pass it on to the private investors. And generally, people have a very bad feeling about it. But if you're passing these good companies to Indians in the end, so the wealth is still within India. So even for the people who think about it.
Shekhar, you're going too fast for me. So let me understand. What you're saying is raising equity means you're asking investors to give money to you. but you need to give them something in exchange, which is an asset. And the assets you're suggesting that we give to investors are public sector units, things that the government,
Disinvestment.
we basically give it to private hands, and that is what raises money. Now you're saying there's a bad feeling about it
Because people think this is wealth of the country and the government is selling. But if you're really giving it to the private individuals in the country,
it's your
the
own
wealth
people.
is within the country.
Yeah, government is the people, and you're taking money from the people to the people. So
To
that's
the
okay.
people.
So
I think if I could just add to that, they're not really creating a lot of wealth. There are a lot of public sector enterprises that are running large losses. So in fact, it's not really an asset. That doesn't mean that there doesn't exist another entity that could run these enterprises in a more efficient way, which is one of the goals that we try to target when it comes to privatization. And there's a lot of evidence on this front as well that privatizing some of these public sector companies leads to large efficiency gains. But we have to be careful here because there are certain industries which may actually end up going the opposite way. So, for instance, if you were to privatize a monopoly, some company in the power sector, it could very well be that the inefficiencies from the monopoly end up outweighing the gains from privatization. Okay. So a good way to do this is to privatize those companies that would be disciplined by competitive pressures. And I think without naming any names, there are certain public sector enterprises to do with airlines and telecom that I think.
Let's name them: Air India, MTNL, so on and so forth. Okay, why not?
And
okay.
Yes,
but the thing is, no one would buy them at this point.
Let me make sure I understand. What you're saying is that within the class of public sector units, the ones to get rid of are those that are not run efficiently in the first place. So the reason for privatizing them was there already, and now that reason is even more strong. So we were thinking of privatizing some of these things, but those numbers were small. I think the target numbers were about what, 10 or 15 billion dollars?
15 billion or around that, yeah.
But we can do much more because we need to raise 100 billion. So maybe we should do a large scale privatization to be able to raise maybe close to 40 or 50 billion dollars. And you're saying it does two things. One is it does bring money from future to the present, and at the same time we may be able to kill some of those inefficiently run firms that were not making money anyway. Okay, so
right.
I can buy that. So I think I've gotten to about 60 or 70 billion. I'm still short. Foreigners. Can I reach out to foreigners? Shekhar?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
I mean, you can raise sovereign debt. I mean, a lot of countries do that if the government of India and RBI agrees. I mean, they kind of agree, but if they stick to the long-term target that the inflation wouldn't go out of control and the rupee would be stabilized against the USD, then even bringing in money or debt which is denominated in a foreign currency wouldn't be such a bad idea.
Okay.
So
let me make sure. What you're saying is that we can raise money internationally, and this may be a good time because real interest rates are low. And if we are disciplined and keep the exchange rates in control, why not? Then, in fact, our costs are not going to be high, even though these are foreign currency denominated debts.
Yes.
Okay.
And I mean, something similar, not exactly the same, was used in 2013, which was taper tantrum period. So the rupee was in a slide, and Rajan was the governor at that time. And I mean, this is based on his interview. Someone suggested that why don't we allow NRIs to park their money into India? And they were given a markup on the dollar. So in the sense they were buying for 65 and they were promised they will get 70 rupees per dollar. And a lot of them.
How much were they able to raise?
So they raised around 30 billion in 2 months.
30 billion, that's good chunk of money. We could use that.
In
No?
2013, and that's just only NRIs. And it was for 3 years
If
of
you
period.
actually open it up to other investors, maybe it could be, so that could be a big source of funding as well. Okay. But
So as long as you do it in a long-term bond, like if it's not a very short-term bond, so we issue a bond which is 5 years long, then things are going to be better in 5 years. So I don't think we'll have a rollover problem in such a long period of time. So I think that is doable.
okay. Now I'm also thinking that you talked about equity by doing privatization. How about equity investment from foreigners? What do you think about that?
I mean, they just blocked China 2 weeks ago. So,
Is that a good idea?
I mean, I don't know.
Shiv, what do you
Yeah.
think?
I mean, as an economist, I don't care about it, but the political economy side of the global situation right now, I mean, you might want to have those considerations in mind. So I wouldn't completely.
You're saying that, you know, if you really read money, then let's not have this double standard which says, oh, we are going to be inward looking. We don't want foreign. At the same time, you need to raise money in the most effective way. So if foreign direct investment is what is needed, that's what is needed. Maybe it comes from China, maybe it comes from the US, maybe it comes from neighboring countries. And it's not obvious why we want to block the neighboring countries and not other countries. So there is some security issues and some nationalistic fervor to these things. Shiv, you were going to say something.
I'm saying that, that there's also an opportunity here. I mean, there's the US, for instance, is having some of the same hiccups as we are in dealing with China. Now, that money has to go somewhere. We could be that destination. So there are certain opportunities here that we could take advantage of, I think, at this point in time.
A good deal. We may get a good deal. So
right.
I think there are a number of good deals going around these days. For example, we can get good deal on borrowing. We can get good deal on FDI. We can get good deal on buying oil reserves. So I think there are a lot of opportunities that are floating around. So I'm pretty satisfied. I think I've reached my 100 billion goal. You said you can raise about 10 or 20 through reallocating spending, another maybe 20 or so by some kind of a debt issuance, not go too much, maybe
domestic
through printing money, maybe another 30 or so by attracting foreigners to give debt instrument, but also FDI. So if we do it, put it all together, I think we can raise 4 or 5%, 100 to $130 billion without resorting to taxes, which seems like a bad idea. So I think those are excellent points. And I thank both of you very much for explaining this in very simple language that everyone can understand. And I hope people who are watching this will enjoy it. And I hope some policymakers will also pay attention to what my esteemed scholars have to say here. Thank you, Shiv. Thank you.
Thanks
Shekhar.
for having us.
Thank you both.